In the year 1100, the largest city in North America was not on the coast. It was not European. It was not recorded in any American history textbook you were handed in school. It was here, 200 mounds, a grand plaza larger than any in the ancient world, 20,000 people. And then, somehow, a continent forgot it existed. The city sat in the floodplain east of where the Missouri meets the Mississippi, a flat, fertile stretch called the American Bottom. The site today is called Cahokia, named not by the people who built it, but by a much smaller, unrelated tribe who happened to live nearby when French traders arrived in the 1600s. The original name of the city, the name its builders used, is not recorded. What is recorded is the footprint, a metropolitan area covering nearly 6 square miles, more than 200 earthen mounds, platform mounds, burial mounds, marker mounds, distributed across a planned urban grid. At the center, a pyramid. The pyramid is called Monk's Mound. It covers 14 acres at its base, more ground than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Giza was built around 2560 BCE. Monk's Mound was built around 1100 CE, 800 years later, by people working without metal tools or the wheel. It rises 100 feet from the prairie in 4 distinct terraces. On its summit stood a wooden ceremonial structure 40 feet long, the size of a modest church. In 1811, a surveyor named Henry Marie Brackenridge climbed it and counted the mounds visible from the top. He counted more than 100. He wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson the following year. Jefferson never responded. The people who lived here played a game called Chunky, a polished stone disc rolled down a cleared lane, players throwing spears to predict where it would stop. Chunky stones have been found from the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic coast. This was not a local game. Cahokia was the center of something continental. In 1956, when the Illinois Department of Transportation began planning the route for Interstate 55, archaeologists from the University of Illinois made a formal request. Survey the mound sites in the path first. The request was not honored. Construction proceeded. Several satellite mounds in the East St. Louis group were graded flat during highway construction between 1956 and 1966. What remained was excavated in fragments under time pressure by salvage teams working around active bulldozers. In 2019, a LiDAR survey, laser mapping from aircraft that sees through vegetation to the ground surface beneath, revealed that the buried footprint of Cahokia extends substantially beyond what was previously mapped. The buried outlines of mounds, plazas, and settlement patterns invisible from the surface are still down there, under subdivisions and strip malls, and a section of interstate highway. The city is not gone. Most of it has not been excavated. Most of it has not been described. Henry Marie Brackenridge visited the American Bottom in 1811. He was a lawyer and explorer, a serious man who kept detailed notes. What he found stopped him. He wrote, "The first thing which arrested my attention was the Great Mound." He documented more than 100 mounds. He wrote a formal letter to Thomas Jefferson in January 1813, urging that the site receive official attention before settlement destroyed it. Jefferson filed it and did not reply. In 1848, Ephraim Squire and Edwin Davis published their survey of American earthworks for the Smithsonian Institution. Squire and Davis noted the mounds, but spent most of their intellectual energy arguing the mounds could not have been built by the ancestors of living Native Americans. They proposed instead a lost, more sophisticated race. This theory, the mound builder myth, dominated American scholarly and popular thinking for 40 years. It gave permission not to look too carefully at who was actually here. The Degihan-speaking peoples, the Osage and the Quapaw among them, have maintained oral traditions placing their origin in the central Mississippi Valley for as long as those traditions have been recorded. When Smithsonian anthropologist Cyrus Thomas published his landmark 1894 report, formally attributing the mounds to the ancestors of living Native American peoples, he was stating in the official government record what the Osage and Quapaw had said all along. The academic argument over who built the mounds was settled in 1894. The popular narrative did not update at the same speed. American schoolchildren continued to learn about Jamestown and Plymouth. The fact that one of the largest cities in the pre-Columbian world sat 200 miles from the geographic center of the continental United States, and that its builders' descendants were still alive and still here, did not make it into the standard curriculum. It still has not. One more piece of ground evidence. In 1967, excavators opened Mound 72. Inside, a single body laid on a platform of 20,000 hand-drilled marine shell beads arranged in the shape of a falcon, wings spread. 250 additional individuals buried in the surrounding layers. This was not a village chieftain. This was a head of state. But Monk's Mound has a larger base than the Great Pyramid, and it was built 800 years later. What it looked like at its height in the year 1100. Approach from the south and you would see the Grand Plaza first. A cleared ceremonial field 2,000 feet long, leveled by hand, surrounded on all four sides by mounds of varying height. Monk's Mound rose behind it, step by step, each terrace hand-packed over generations. On the summit, a large wooden building, ceremonial in function, visible from miles across the floodplain. The city was enclosed by a log palisade wall, upright posts 2 feet in diameter, roughly 12 feet tall, nearly 2 miles of fortification. Beyond the central precinct, residential neighborhoods spread outward across the floodplain in planned clusters. Thatched roof homes, food storage structures, community hearths, satellite mound centers at Mitchell to the north, East St. Louis to the west, Cahokia at the center. The total population of the metropolitan area at its peak has been estimated by archaeologists at between 10 and 20,000 people. In the year 1100, London held between 10 and 15,000. Paris was comparable. Cahokia was, by any reasonable definition, a city, a North American city, in 1100, that most Americans have never heard of. Daily life in the city centered on the Grand Plaza. The chunky game was more than recreation. It was a ritual, a betting event, a demonstration of skill that carried social weight. Players hurled long spears at a rolling stone disc, wagering on the outcome. Observers gathered along the plaza edges. The stakes could be clothing, tools, food, status. The chunky stones themselves were prestige objects, smooth ground discs of fine stone, portable, carefully maintained, passed down or traded across vast distances. The continental distribution of chunky stones is the most visible material trace of the Cahokian cultural sphere. Trade goods moved through Cahokia from the Gulf Coast to the Great Lakes, from the Rocky Mountain foothills to the Appalachian highlands. Marine shell from the Gulf, copper from Lake Superior, chert from Arkansas. The merchants and traders who moved these goods across the continent were not moving through wilderness. They were moving through a world with a center. That center was here. In 1971, excavators working in the Mound 72 area recovered a small, flat sandstone tablet, roughly the size of a playing card. On its face, incised in the geometric line style of Mississippian iconography, a winged figure, half human, half bird, wings spread, body upright, eyes forward. The Birdman. The figure appears across Mississippian art from Oklahoma to Georgia. It represents a specific cosmological figure, a chief, a warrior, a divine intermediary, central to the belief system of Cahokia and its cultural sphere. The tablet is now in a museum storage facility in Illinois. Most Americans have not heard of it. It is as significant to the history of this continent as the Rosetta Stone is to the history of Egypt. Monk's Mound is still there. You can drive to it. It sits in Collinsville, Illinois, maintained as a state historic site, with a walking path up one face to the summit. From the top, you can see the St. Louis skyline across the river. You can see the highway. You can see where the other mounds were. The mound itself is grass now. No temple on the summit, no palisade below. The Grand Plaza is a parking lot and a picnic area. 70 of the original 200 and more mounds still exist in some form. The rest were plowed flat for agriculture in the 1800s or graded into the interstate alignment in the 1960s. What is left is enough to understand what was here. What was here was enough to matter. In 1961, archaeologist Warren Whittrey, working through salvage notes from an earlier Smithsonian survey, identified a pattern of post pits in the soil west of the main precinct. When mapped, the pits formed a circle, 410 feet across, of 48 red cedar posts. The circle aligned precisely to the solstice and equinox sunrise. Cahokia had a solar calendar. It worked. Who is responsible for the erasure of Cahokia from the American public record? The answer is not a single person. The answer is a set of decisions made by institutions over 2 centuries, each one individually defensible, collectively devastating. Decision 1. The American educational establishment, which by the mid-20th century had produced a standardized K-12 history curriculum that opened with European contact and treated pre-Columbian North America as empty background. Cahokia does not appear in the index of most standard American history textbooks. Look for it. It is not there. Decision 2. The Federal Bureau of Public Roads, which in 1956 routed Interstates 55 and 70 through the East St. Louis metropolitan area without ordering an archaeological hold on the mound sites in the corridor. The federal process for requesting such a hold existed. It was not invoked. Decision 3. The funding gap that persists to this day, which keeps the site understaffed and underinterpreted relative to its historical significance. On April 14, 1956, the U.S. Bureau of Public Roads, Division of Design, issued a memorandum regarding the Interstate 55 and 70 alignment through the East St. Louis corridor. The memo described the planned right-of-way. It noted that Indian mound sites within the proposed corridor would be flattened during grading operations, as no archaeological hold had been requested. The memo was approved and filed. The grading proceeded between 1956 and 1966. Some mounds in the East St. Louis group were documented in fragments before they were destroyed. Others were not. The archaeologists who knew what was there did not have the authority to stop the construction. The officials who had the authority to stop the construction did not consider what was there worth stopping for. This is not a conspiracy. It is something more ordinary and more durable. A bureaucratic procedure operating on the assumption that what was buried here did not count. The mechanism of erasure ran across 2 centuries. The mound builder myth provided the intellectual cover from the 1840s to the 1890s. The idea that the mounds were built by a lost, superior race made it easier to disregard the living descendants. Cyrus Thomas corrected the record in 1894, but did not correct the curriculum. The interstate came through in the 1950s and 1960s with no preservation mandate. UNESCO designated Cahokia a World Heritage Site in 1982. The textbook absence persists in 2024. Cahokia's annual state operating budget is approximately $1.8 million. Monticello operates on $24 million. Mount Vernon on $50 million. The recognition exists. The resources do not follow it. What the official record says and what the evidence says. The official record, as reflected in standard American educational materials, says this: pre-Columbian North America was sparsely populated by nomadic or semi-nomadic peoples living in small, decentralized communities without cities, writing, or complex political organization. The evidence says this: at its peak around 1100 CE, Cahokia was the largest city in North America north of Mexico. Its population matched or exceeded that of contemporary London or Paris. Its urban plan was sophisticated and intentional. Its political organization was hierarchical and formal, demonstrated by the scale of public works, the evidence of centralized labor, and the mortuary evidence from Mound 72, showing a ruling class with power over life and death. Its cultural sphere extended across the continent. Its builders were not a lost race. They were the ancestors of peoples still living in the United States today. The Osage Nation of Oklahoma, the Quapaw Nation of Arkansas, and others among the Degihan-speaking peoples. The official record was wrong. The evidence was always there. The evidence has been there since Breckinridge wrote his letter to Jefferson in 1813, and Jefferson filed it without reply. 200 years of a gap between what the ground holds and what the curriculum teaches is not an accident. It is a choice, made and remade, generation after generation, in syllabi and in budget hearings, and in highway right-of-way decisions. The Osage Nation and the Quapaw Nation have not been silent about this. The Osage oral tradition has always located the origin of the Degihan peoples in the central Mississippi Valley. When archaeologists proposed in the 20th century that the Mississippian cultural horizon represented a people with no surviving descendants, Osage and Quapaw tribal historians disagreed. They were correct. The ongoing process of repatriation, returning the human remains and sacred objects from Cahokia excavations, including those from Mound 72, to tribal nations under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, is not yet complete. Negotiations between the relevant tribal nations and the holding institutions are continuing. The people buried in Mound 72 have not yet come home. The descendants know who they are. The institutions that hold the remains are still working through the paperwork. This is where the case stands in 2024. The verdict is partial. What has been won? UNESCO World Heritage status, archaeological consensus on indigenous authorship, a protected site. What remains? Contested, federal funding parity with sites of comparable historical significance, inclusion in the standard K-12 curriculum. Full repatriation of Mound 72 burials. The case is recognized. The case is closing. The case is not closed. The file on Cahokia stays open. In 1813, Breckinridge wrote a letter that went unanswered. In 1894, Thomas filed a report that corrected the record, but not the curriculum. In 1956, a memo approved the demolition of a World Heritage Site before anyone called it that. The case doesn't close when the answer is found. It closes when the answer is taught. There are more cases. There are cities under highway interchanges, oral traditions in federal archives, artifacts in storage rooms waiting for paperwork that moves slowly. Each one has a file. Each file has a first page. The next case opens now.